My parents tried to keep my inheritance. I don't usually post long stories, but if there's one part of my life I've been needing to unload, it's this. If you've ever grown up in a house where favoritism wasn't just subtle but practically written into the family constitution, then you'll get it. If not, buckle up. Because my story isn't just about being the forgotten kid, it's about how that forgetting shaped everything in me, and how one man, my grandfather, became the only anchor that kept me from drifting into nothingness. I grew up in a house where it was very clear from the beginning that there were two kinds of children, the chosen one and the other one. Guess which one I was? My younger sister Leah was the golden child. From the second she was born, my parents treated her like she was a literal miracle. And maybe in their eyes, she was. But what that meant for me was simple. My existence became background noise. I still remember being 6 years old and watching my mom hold baby Leah while people from the neighborhood came to visit. She beamed like she'd just won an award. My dad strutted around like he'd built her himself out of gold. And me, I sat in the corner of the living room holding a toy car, waiting for someone to notice me. No one did. That was the first taste I got of invisibility, and it never really went away. Birthdays were the worst. You'd think those are the one days in a kid's life where they feel like the center of the world. Not me. My birthdays were like afterthoughts. When I turned 10, my parents gave me a small cake from the grocery store. No decorations, no candles, just a cake in a plastic container with happy birthday written in messy icing. I remember mom saying, "Don't complain, at least you got a cake." Fast forward 2 months later, Leah's 7th birthday. They rented out a whole skating rink, balloons everywhere, a 3-tiered princess cake. She got gifts stacked so high they didn't even fit in the car. I watched her blow out candles with a crowd of kids cheering around her, while I stood to the side, clapping politely. People sometimes ask, "Didn't your relatives notice?" Oh, they noticed. But the thing about family dynamics is, once favoritism is established, everyone falls in line. My aunts and uncles spoiled Leah too. My grandparents on my mom's side constantly said, "She's such a bright star." Meanwhile, if I got a C in math, I was lazy or not applying myself. There was no winning. If you think maybe school gave me some sense of worth, nope. Even there, my parents' favoritism followed. I was in a school play in 4th grade. Nothing major, but I had a speaking role. I practiced for weeks. The night of the play, I was scanning the crowd for my parents, desperate to see them smiling, cheering me on. They never showed up. You know where they were? At Leah's gymnastics class. She was five, doing little cartwheels that weren't even straight. When I asked them why they didn't come, Dad said, "Come on, it's just a school play. Leah's training could lead to scholarships." I learned very young that my achievements didn't matter. If Leah got a participation ribbon, it was front and center on the fridge. When I got 2nd place in a spelling bee, my mom said, "Why not first?" and then tossed the ribbon in a drawer. This one always blows people's minds, but even meals were uneven. If there were 4 slices of pizza left and 5 people eating, guess who didn't get one? Me. If there were extra cookies, straight to Leah. If she didn't like dinner, mom would cook something special for her. One night I asked, "Why doesn't Leah have to eat the same as us?" Mom shot back, "Because she's younger. She needs more care." I was 12. Leah was 9. But apparently, at any age, her needs outweighed mine. It sounds small, but over time, those little things stack up. It wasn't about pizza or cookies. It was about worth. I didn't have any. By the time I hit my teens, I figured out that if I wanted anything, I'd have to get it myself. My parents weren't going to buy me clothes, gadgets, or even fund hobbies. But for Leah, new clothes every season. The latest iPhone as soon as it came out. Private lessons for every interest she had. So I got a part-time job at 14. I bagged groceries at the local store. My paycheck wasn't big, but it meant I could buy the sneakers I wanted without begging. I could go to the movies with friends without asking for gas money from Dad, who would have just said no anyway. Of course, even that was criticized. Mom would say, "You're working too much. Focus on school." Meanwhile, Leah was allowed to skip chores to rest after her tennis lessons. The more independent I became, the more my parents resented it. It was like they wanted me to stay dependent on them so that they could keep reminding me how little they wanted to give. But I refused. If they weren't going to value me, I'd value myself. Still, the scars of being the other child were deep. Even when I was doing fine, there was always this voice in my head whispering, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough." And then there was Grandpa. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was the only one who seemed to notice how lopsided things were. He lived about 20 minutes away, and I spent as much time at his house as I could. His place smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. And it was the one place where I felt human. He never compared me to Leah. Never once said, "Why can't you be more like her?" Instead, he asked me questions about my life. He wanted to know what I was interested in. He listened when I talked about books or when I showed him the short stories I was writing. He even came to one of my school debates, something my parents never did, and afterward, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You've got a sharp tongue. You're going to need that one day. One summer, when I was 15, I was sitting with him on his porch. He was sipping tea and I was venting about how mom and dad had skipped my soccer game to take Leah shopping. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes heavy, and said, "You know, kid, people show you who they are by how they treat you, but don't ever think their blindness means you're invisible. You see yourself, I see you. That's enough to keep you going." Then he added something that stuck with me. "Someday, justice will come. Maybe not in the way you expect, but it will." At the time, I thought he was just trying to comfort me, but he said it with such certainty, like he knew something I didn't. Meanwhile, Leah grew into her role flawlessly. By high school, she was the princess at home and the queen bee at school. My parents attended every one of her cheerleading competitions, every one of her talent shows. If she so much as sneezed, my mom was at the doctor's office with her. Me, I sprained my ankle in a soccer game once, drove myself home. When dad saw me limping, he said, "Don't be dramatic, walk it off." Leah got a brand new car for her 16th birthday. A shiny silver SUV with a bow on it. I didn't get anything. Not even a happy birthday. I borrowed rides, took the bus, and sometimes walked. And I worked even harder at my grocery store job because I knew I couldn't expect a dime from them. By the time I was 18, it was clear. Leah was the heir to the family's love, attention, and resources. And me, I was just extra, or so they thought. Because behind the scenes, Grandpa had been watching, and while I didn't know it then, all the years of him listening, supporting me, and quietly hinting at justice, they were leading to something much bigger, something that would change everything after he was gone. But that's a storm for later. For now, just know this. Growing up as a forgotten child didn't just shape me, it hardened me. It taught me that blood doesn't always mean loyalty, and it made me ready for the day I'd have to stand on my own, completely. Because when you've been forgotten long enough, you learn how to remember yourself. When I say the air left my lungs the day Grandpa died, I'm not exaggerating. It felt like someone had pulled the last solid thing out from under me and I was just floating in space, untethered. I was 20 years old, still in college, still figuring out how to keep myself afloat with part-time jobs and student loans, still carrying the scars of being the forgotten kid. And Grandpa, he had been my anchor, the one person who had ever looked at me and seen something worth investing in, worth loving. So when I got the call from the hospital that he had passed in his sleep, I sat in my dorm room and just stared at the wall for hours. My phone buzzed with texts from my parents, but not one of them said, "Are you okay?" or "How are you holding up?" Instead, my mom's first text read, "The lawyer called. We need to meet for the reading of the will." I wish I could say I was shocked, but honestly, I wasn't. The funeral was a circus. That's the only way I can describe it. My parents, who barely visited Grandpa unless they wanted something, were suddenly the stars of the grief parade. My mom wore all black and kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue that, I swear, stayed bone dry the entire time. My dad shook hands with every relative and kept saying, "He was a great man, truly a great man," like he was a politician campaigning at his own father's funeral. Leah, of course, played her role perfectly. She cried just enough to get sympathy hugs, but not so much that her makeup ran. At one point, I overheard her whisper to her friend, "I wonder if he left me the lake house. I always loved it there." The lake house. That was Grandpa's pride and joy. A small, weathered cabin by the water. Nothing fancy, but it held decades of family history. It was where I'd learned to fish, where Grandpa taught me how to row a boat, where he told me stories about his childhood. Leah went maybe twice in her whole life, and both times she complained about the bugs. But sure, she always loved it. Me? I sat quietly in the corner, mourning the man who had actually mattered to me. I didn't need to put on a show. My grief was real. But even through the fog of loss, I noticed something. My parents weren't talking about memories. They weren't talking about his laugh, his stubbornness, or his love of crossword puzzles. No. Every hushed conversation I overheard was about assets, estate, and inheritance. It hit me then. To them, Grandpa's death wasn't a tragedy. It was an opportunity. 2 weeks later, we all sat in a wood-paneled office that smelled like dust and old paper. The lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Harris, had Grandpa's will spread out in front of him. I wasn't expecting much. Honestly, I thought maybe Grandpa would leave me one of his old books or his pocket watch, something sentimental. I knew my parents worshipped Leah, and I figured most of the estate would go to her. I'd made peace with that. So when Mr. Harris cleared his throat and said, "Per the wishes of the deceased, the entirety of the estate, including all monetary assets, property holdings, and investments, will be left to his grandson," and then said my name, the room went silent. At first I thought I'd misheard. I blinked. "Wait, what?" Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. "The estate is to be transferred fully to you. That includes the family home, the lake house, the financial accounts, and the trust fund." My mom gasped like someone had slapped her. My dad's face went beet red. Leah dropped her phone on the floor. "And me?" I sat there in stunned silence, my brain trying to catch up with the words. Grandpa had left me everything? I glanced down at the paperwork, at my name written clearly as the sole heir. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the chosen one. It took about 3 seconds for my parents to switch from shock to damage control. My mom leaned forward, her voice sugary but sharp. There must be some mistake. Are you sure? Mr. Harris tapped the paper. This was his updated will, signed and notarized 6 months before his passing. It is legally binding. Leah's voice cracked as she shrieked, "That's not fair. He knew I needed the lake house for my future." Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow. "Miss, your grandfather was very clear in his decision. He explicitly stated that his grandson was the only one he trusted to handle his estate responsibly." I don't know what came over me, but I actually laughed. Not a big laugh, just a short, stunned chuckle, because I could practically hear Grandpa's voice in those words. He trusted me, not them, me. My dad turned to me then, his face hard. "Well, obviously you'll be dividing this fairly. Your sister deserves her share. We raised you, after all. You owe us that much." There it was. The guilt trip. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "Dad, it's not about me deciding. This is what Grandpa wanted." Mom jumped in, her voice rising. "Don't be selfish. Family shares with family. You can't just take everything and leave us with nothing." Nothing. That word hit me like a punch. For years, they'd given me nothing. And now, when the scales finally tipped in my favor, suddenly nothing was unacceptable. The days after the will reading were hell. My parents bombarded me with calls, texts, and late-night family meetings. "Think about how hard we worked to raise you," Mom would say, eyes glistening with fake tears. "We sacrificed so much." "You wouldn't even be here without us," Dad added. "That inheritance is as much ours as it is yours." And Leah? She played her part too. "Come on, you know I need the money for school. You've always been selfish. Don't start now." Selfish. The word burned. I wanted to scream at her. Selfish? I was the kid who got hand-me-downs while she got brand new clothes. I was the one who worked 2 jobs while she got her car handed to her. I was the one who got ignored while she got praised for existing. And now, because Grandpa had finally given me something, I was selfish. But the hardest part wasn't their words. It was the little voice in my own head that whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe you should share. They're still your family." That's the thing about growing up forgotten. Even when the scales finally tilt your way, you're so used to being told you don't deserve anything that you start to believe it. One night, after another brutal family meeting where my parents accused me of tearing the family apart, I drove to the lake house. I sat on the porch, staring at the still water, and thought about Grandpa. About the way he always looked me in the eye when I spoke, like what I said mattered. About the time he told me, someday justice will come. And it hit me. This was it. This inheritance wasn't just money. It was his way of leveling the scales, of saying, "I saw what they did. I know how they treated you, and I'm making it right." For the first time, I realized I wasn't just honoring a legal document. I was honoring him. The next time my parents cornered me, I stood my ground. "I'm not dividing the inheritance," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Grandpa made his choice. I'm going to respect it." Mom's face twisted like I'd stabbed her. "You ungrateful little—" Dad slammed his fist on the table. "We should have known you'd turn against us." And Leah, with tears streaming down her face, spat, "I hate you. You're ruining everything." But for once, their words didn't crush me, because underneath all the noise, I could hear Grandpa's voice. Calm, steady, certain. Justice will come. And I realized something else. Maybe justice wasn't just about money. Maybe it was about finally standing up for myself. Finally saying, "No, I matter too." It was the beginning of a war. I knew that much. My family wasn't going to give up easily. But as I walked out of that room, my head held high, I felt something I'd never felt before. Power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the one holding the cards, and I wasn't going to fold. If I thought my parents were going to sulk for a week and then get over the inheritance, I was dead wrong. The will reading wasn't the end of the fight, it was the opening bell. The first round was emotional blackmail. They came at me like I was the villain in their story. One night, I got a call from my mom at 11 p.m. I answered, groggy, expecting some emergency. Instead, she launched into this rehearsed speech. "Do you really want to tear this family apart?" She sniffled. "If you loved us, you'd give it up. We're your parents. Everything you have, you owe to us." I sat there in silence, the phone pressed to my ear. Owe to them? These were the people who skipped my soccer games, who forgot my birthdays, who let me eat leftovers while Leah got steak. What exactly did I owe? But before I could even form a reply, Dad's voice boomed in the background. "Tell him he's destroying this family. Tell him he's selfish." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from guilt, from anger. That became their strategy for weeks. Random calls, texts dripping with guilt, letters slipped under my dorm door. Always the same theme. If you really cared, you'd hand it over. But every time, I remembered Grandpa's words. Don't let them take what's yours. And I didn't. When guilt didn't work, they turned to character assassination. At a family gathering a month later, my aunt pulled me aside and whispered, "Why are you being so greedy? Your parents are devastated." Greedy. That word made my stomach turn. Apparently, my parents had been telling every relative who would listen that I was hoarding the inheritance, refusing to do the right thing. They painted me as some spoiled brat who turned his back on his family the second money came into play. Leah joined in too. She went on social media with cryptic posts like, "It's sad when greed destroys families. Some people forget where they came from." People started messaging me, asking if it was true, if I'd really cut my parents off. Some even told me I should be ashamed. And honestly, it hurt. I wanted to scream at them. You don't know the full story. You don't know how many nights I went hungry while Leah got second helpings. You don't know how many times I begged for attention and got ignored. But I didn't, because I realized something important. People believe the story they hear most often, not the one that's true. And my parents? They were hell-bent on making their version louder. Then came the threats. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail from a law firm. My parents were considering contesting the will. The paper was full of legal jargon, but the gist was clear. They were preparing to drag me into court. I brought the letter to Mr. Harris, Grandpa's lawyer. He skimmed it, snorted, and tossed it back onto his desk. "They don't have a case," he said. "Your grandfather's will was airtight. He knew what he was doing." "But can they actually sue me?" I asked. "They can try," he said, "but it won't hold up. Your grandfather specifically outlined his reasoning. He wrote a statement saying he believed you were the only one responsible enough to manage his assets. That's rare, but powerful in court." Hearing that should have eased me, but it didn't, because I knew my parents. They weren't going to care about winning or losing. They just wanted to make my life hell until I gave in. In the middle of all this chaos, I kept having flashbacks of Grandpa, like the time he taught me how to fix a flat tire. I was 16, sweaty and frustrated, ready to give up. But he crouched beside me and said, "Patience, kid. Anyone can quit when it gets tough. What makes you different is if you keep going." Or the time I lost a debate competition and came home crushed. He sat me down and said, "Losing doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've got room to grow. The only way you really lose is if you stop standing up for yourself." Those words echoed louder than my parents' insults, and I realized that was why he left everything to me. He trusted me, not just to hold on, but to fight back. When emotional blackmail, slander, and legal threats didn't work, my parents got creative. One day, I went to the bank to check on one of Grandpa's accounts. The teller frowned and said, "Didn't you already withdraw from this account last week?" My stomach dropped. "No, I didn't." Turns out, someone had tried to access the account using a forged signature. The bank froze it immediately and launched an investigation. Guess whose handwriting the signature suspiciously resembled? My dad's. Another time, I visited the lake house only to find the locks changed. Leah was inside, lounging on the couch like she owned the place. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked. She smirked. "This place is mine. Mom and Dad said so." "It's literally not," I snapped, holding up the deed with my name on it. She rolled her eyes. "Paper doesn't mean anything. Family does." That line nearly broke me. Not because it was true, but because of how twisted it was. In her mind, family meant she was entitled to everything, and I was entitled to nothing. I had to call the sheriff to get her out. Watching her scream and cry as she was escorted off the property was surreal. She kept yelling, "You're ruining my life," like I was the villain. But in that moment, I realized just how deep their greed ran. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. They couldn't stand the idea of me, the forgotten child, finally holding power. The breaking point came at Thanksgiving. We were all sitting at the dinner table, tension thick enough to choke on. My parents had invited extended family, and I knew they were planning some kind of ambush. Halfway through the meal, Dad stood up with his glass raised. "We're thankful for family," he said, "but sadly, some of us have forgotten what that means." Everyone's eyes turned to me. Mom chimed in. "It breaks our hearts that greed has poisoned our son. We tried to raise him better." Leah sniffled dramatically. "I just want my brother back." That was it. I slammed my fork down and stood. "You want the truth?" I said, my voice shaking. "Here it is. You don't care about family. You care about money. You always have. You ignored me my whole life, treated me like I didn't exist, and now that Grandpa finally saw me, finally gave something, suddenly I'm selfish? No. I'm done being your scapegoat. I'm done letting you rewrite the story. This inheritance is mine. Not because I asked for it, but because Grandpa knew who you really are." The room went dead silent. Then my aunt, the same one who had called me greedy weeks earlier, muttered, "You know what? He's right." That was the first crack. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, people were starting to see through my parents' act. Driving home that night, my chest tight, I realized something big. This wasn't just a fight over money. This was a fight for my identity. For years, they tried to make me believe I was worthless, invisible, but Grandpa hadn't seen me that way. He'd seen me as capable, responsible, strong. And every time I refused to cave, I was proving him right. My parents' greed wasn't just ugly, it was endless. They were willing to lie, manipulate, even commit fraud to get what they wanted. And it hit me. If I didn't hold firm, if I gave in even a little, they'd drain me dry and leave me with nothing. So I made a choice that night. No matter what they threw at me, guilt, lies, lawsuits, sabotage, I wasn't going to break. Because Grandpa's voice was still in my head. Calm and steady. Don't let them take what's yours. And for the first time in my life, I finally believed I was worth holding on to. If you thought things couldn't get uglier after my family tried to guilt trip me into giving up my inheritance, you'd be dead wrong. This was only the beginning. At first, their anger came in waves. Teary phone calls, guilt-soaked messages, half-hearted attempts at reconciliation that always ended with, "So, have you decided to split it with your brother yet?" But when it became clear that I wasn't budging, they stopped pretending. They declared war. And when I say war, I don't mean the kind fought with screaming matches at the dinner table. I mean full-scale, reputation-destroying, legal nuclear option kind of war. It started with whispers. Suddenly, relatives who used to greet me warmly at family gatherings started giving me cold stares or making backhanded comments. "Oh, so you're the one who's too good for family now," my aunt muttered at a birthday party. My cousin texted me out of the blue. "Hey, I don't know what's going on between you and your parents, but they're saying you stole something from them." Stole. That was the word they were planting in people's heads, that I had stolen the inheritance from my own parents and brother. When I confronted my mom about it, she didn't even deny it. She just said, "Well, we have to tell people something, otherwise they'll think you're just cruel for following Grandpa's will." The legal threats came next. One morning, I woke up to a letter shoved into you under my apartment door, probably hand-delivered by some lawyer they hired. It was an official-looking document claiming they were going to contest the will, alleging Grandpa wasn't of sound mind when he wrote it. That letter made my stomach drop. I knew Grandpa was sharp until his last breath, but the idea of having to prove it in court terrified me. They weren't just trying to guilt me into giving up. They wanted to drag me through the mud legally. And let me tell you, when you're one person against an entire family hell-bent on painting you as the villain, it feels like standing in the middle of a storm with nothing but an umbrella. But here's the thing. Grandpa wasn't some naive old man who didn't see this coming. He had warned me. I remembered sitting with him on the porch swing one summer evening. I must have been 19, fresh off a long shift at my crappy part-time job, exhausted but grateful to spend a few hours with him. He looked me in the eye and said, "You have something they'll never understand. Grit. They'll try to take from you. They always will, because they think you don't matter. But someday, they'll realize you're the only one who does. And when that day comes, you have to promise me you won't fold." At the time, I thought he was just being poetic. Now I realized he had been preparing me for this exact battle. I decided to lawyer up. I didn't have the money or the connections for some high-powered attorney, but that's when I discovered another piece of Grandpa's foresight. Apparently, before he passed, he had reached out to an old friend of his, a lawyer named Martin, who specialized in estate law. Martin called me himself. "I was told to give you a call when this day came," he said. His voice was calm, measured, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. When I met him in his office, he had a thick folder already waiting on the desk with my name on it. Inside were documents Grandpa had prepared, medical records proving his mental clarity, signed witness statements, even a video recording of him explaining why he made the choices he did in his will. I nearly broke down crying right there in Martin's office. Grandpa hadn't just trusted me with his inheritance. He had prepared a shield for me to carry into battle. Meanwhile, my parents and brother were escalating. They spread rumors that I was spending their money recklessly. They posted passive-aggressive things on Facebook about selfish children and ingrates who forget who raised them. My brother even showed up at my apartment once, pounding on the door until I answered. His face was red with anger. "You think you're better than me now?" he spat. "You think Grandpa chose you because you're special." He was old. He didn't know what he was doing. That money was supposed to be mine. I told him Grandpa had made his choice and that I was honoring it. His eyes narrowed and he said something that chilled me. "You were never supposed to get anything. You were just the spare, the mistake, and now you're ruining everything." He left after that, but his words stuck with me. The mistake. That's how my family really saw me. Not as their child, not as their sibling, just a backup plan that went wrong. The court date finally came. I won't lie to you. I was shaking like a leaf walking into that courtroom. My parents were there in their best clothes, faces arranged in masks of sorrow, as if they were the wronged ones. My brother sat beside them, glaring at me like he could burn holes through my skull. Their lawyer stood up first, painting a picture of Grandpa as a confused old man, manipulated by me into signing over everything. He said I isolated him, pressured him, and took advantage of his declining health. Each word felt like a dagger, twisting the knife deeper into my chest. But then it was our turn. Martin stood tall, calm as ever, and presented the evidence. The medical records proving Grandpa's sharpness, the witnesses who testified that Grandpa made his decisions clearly and intentionally, and finally, the video. There he was, Grandpa, sitting in his favorite armchair, speaking directly to the camera. If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and I know my family is probably raising hell about my choices. But I want to be clear, I'm leaving everything to my name, because they earned it. They worked hard when no one helped them. They showed me kindness when others only wanted something from me. I love my whole family, but only my name has proven they can carry my legacy forward. This is my decision, and it is final. The courtroom was silent. I glanced over at my parents, and for the first time I saw cracks in their composure. My mom's lips pressed into a thin line. My dad's face flushed. My brother looked like he might explode. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. The will stood. The inheritance was mine. But victory didn't feel sweet. It felt heavy. Because winning meant fully realizing the truth. My family's love had always been conditional, and now that condition was gone. After court, my mom stormed up to me, tears streaming down her face. "You've destroyed this family," she hissed. "I hope you're happy." I wanted to scream at her, to ask how she could ever think money mattered more than her own child, but I didn't. I just walked away. Grandpa's words echoing in my head, "Don't fold." That night, I sat in my apartment alone, the weight of it all crushing me. I had won, yes, but at what cost? Still, deep down, I knew this wasn't just about money. This was about proving I wasn't the forgotten child anymore. I was the one Grandpa believed in, the one who survived. And no matter how ugly things had gotten, I wasn't about to let his faith in me go to waste. When the dust settled after the court ruling, I thought maybe my family would finally back off. That maybe, just maybe, losing in front of a judge would humble them. But if there's one thing I learned through this entire nightmare, it's that greed doesn't die easy. At first, they tried to appeal. Their lawyer filed some nonsense about unfair distribution and lack of family consideration. It went nowhere, of course, because Grandpa's will was ironclad. Martin had made sure of that. Then, when the legal route dried up, they tried the social one. My mom posted long, dramatic rants on Facebook about losing everything to an ungrateful child. My dad called distant relatives and told them I had manipulated Grandpa. My brother told anyone who'd listen that I had robbed him of his future. For a while, it worked. Old family friends stopped talking to me. People I grew up around looked at me like I was a thief. But the funny thing about lies is that they only last until the truth comes out. And eventually, it did. See, while my family was busy throwing tantrums, I was busy making moves. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was property, investments, and assets that Grandpa had built carefully over decades. He hadn't just given me wealth, he'd given me a foundation, a chance to build something lasting. The first thing I did, I paid off every bit of my own debt. Student loans, credit cards, the medical bills I'd racked up from ignoring my health in my early 20s because I couldn't afford proper care. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. The second thing I did, I invested in myself. I went back to school part-time for something I'd always wanted to study but could never afford. I started therapy to work through the years of being the forgotten child, and I took trips, small ones at first, then bigger, to places I'd only ever seen in pictures. But the biggest thing I did, the thing that mattered most, was honoring Grandpa. Grandpa had always been passionate about community. He believed in helping people who had no one else. So I set up a foundation in his name. Nothing flashy at first, just a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids in our town who wanted to go to college. Then it grew. We added mentorship programs, local grants, even partnerships with small businesses. Every time I signed a check for that foundation, I felt him with me. Every time a kid wrote a thank you letter, I felt like I was carrying out the mission he had trusted me with. And here's the wild part. The same relatives who once whispered that I was selfish now had to sit and watch as I built something bigger than all their petty greed combined. Meanwhile, my parents and brother weren't doing so well. The legal bills from contesting the will drained their savings. My dad had to sell off his car and some other assets just to keep afloat. My mom picked up extra shifts at work, something she hadn't done in years because she was always so focused on appearances. And my brother, the golden child, he spiraled. Without Grandpa's money cushioning his lifestyle, he struggled. He'd never learned how to stand on his own feet because he'd always had them to carry him. Suddenly, he was bouncing from job to job, living off handouts from friends and whining that the world was against him. I won't pretend I felt sorry for him. Maybe a tiny part of me did at first, but then I remembered all the times he stood by while they tore me down. All the times he joined in, laughing at me, mocking me, treating me like I was worth less than nothing. Karma isn't always instant, but trust me, it catches up. One day, months later, my mom called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was small, almost broken. "We lost the house," she said. We don't know what to do. For a second, I just sat there, the silence between us heavy. This was the same woman who once looked me in the eye and called me cruel for not giving her what was never hers in the first place. The same woman who raised me to believe I was the spare, the mistake. "I'm sorry," I said finally. And I meant it, not because I felt responsible, but because it was sad to hear the people who raised me had destroyed themselves with their own greed. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "Can you help us?" And for the first time in my life, I said no. It wasn't easy cutting them off. Society makes you feel like you owe your parents unconditional loyalty no matter how they treat you. But the truth is, family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love, respect, and care. And by that definition, they weren't my family anymore. Instead, I leaned on the people who had been there all along. Friends who never wavered, relatives who quietly supported me, even strangers who believed in the work I was doing with the foundation. Slowly, I built a new kind of family, one that chose me. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about everything I went through. The favoritism, the cruelty, the endless fights over what should have been a blessing. And yeah, it hurts. Losing your parents and sibling, even by choice, isn't something you just brush off. But then I remember the kid I used to be. The one who worked double shifts just to buy school supplies while his brother got everything handed to him. The one who cried himself to sleep because he thought he wasn't good enough. The one who sat on the porch swing with Grandpa and promised he wouldn't fold. That kid deserved better. And now, finally, he has it. Here's the part I want to leave you with. They tried to strip me of everything. They tried to rewrite history, to paint me as the villain, to take away the one thing that was truly mine. They tried to keep me small, invisible, dependent. But instead of breaking me, they built me. And in the end, they didn't just fail to take my inheritance. They failed to take my strength, my future, my life. Because the truth is simple. They tried to take everything from me. Instead, I took back my life. Alright, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.